everyone, and welcome back to my channel. Today I'm doing a speed paint video for you guys, and I'm going to kind of comment a little on what I'm doing. Mostly just going to ramble for you while my hand at inhumanly fast speeds paints a lovely picture of a moon over a waterfall. After painting the sky black, I realized I wanted it to be brighter because in the front of the picture, I was going to make sort of the cliff or the hill that the water's going down black. So I didn't want the sky and the cliff to kind of blend together since I was already creating that illusion with the moon and the waterfall, and I felt like it would just sort of take away from it. This next part here I like to call the method of the sky isn't turning out the way I want it, so F it and grab a sponge. I like the way the sponge kind of gave the sky a cloudy texture, kind of like it's foggy and yet the moon's still there. I don't know. It's not something you'd see in nature, but I think that's what makes painting so fun, is that you can just make whatever you want, you know? And I brought back the sponge here just to give the moon some texture, because the moon isn't perfectly smooth. It's got craters, it's got shadows. I used the gray to give it dark spots, and then I used some white to give it some more craters and just a bit of contrast. Next up is probably the easiest part about this whole painting. Just taking a brush and some pure black and outlining the sides of the waterfall. The only thing I had to watch for was keeping my lines nice and neat at the top. I focused on keeping the lines nice and neat now, that way I don't have to go back and paint over top of it later. Although I think I did end up altering the shape of the top later. I wanted to give it less of a straight line and more of like a natural kind of jagged shape. This next part was just a lot of blending and experimenting with colors. I know water can have this green tint, but I also wanted to keep it blue. I wasn't really sure which one to go with, so I settled on keeping it green at the bottom and blue at the top. That just helped to make the water blend in with the moon at the top, since blue was the base I used for the moon. As I painted the waterfall, I kept in mind that water will split into different pathways. I kept in the front of my mind all the different rivers and pathways that my water was going to go. That's why I have a sketch, because it really helps me to keep the original idea in mind. But the fun part about having a sketch and then painting over top of your sketch is that sometimes your idea will just take on a life of its own and it'll completely go in a different direction, and you kind of just have to work with the flow. No pun intended. Now, I feel like this part doesn't need much explanation because I'm just filling in the black spots, but at the top you have to be very, very careful to keep your paintbrush thin so it can fit between the thinnest parts, or like the closest parts of the rivers. Here's where I come back in with some white paint to give the illusion that the water is rushing and it's making splashes and bubbles. I really feel like this is where the water starts to come to life, and it feels more like I'm painting water as opposed to just taking watercolored paints and sticking them on a canvas. For the next little while, I'll just keep playing around with the color of the water and the splashes until I have this effect that I'm happy with. And right about here is where I get this genius idea that splashing water will, actually splash, and it'll leave the confined space that I've made for it so far. I start flicking my brush outside of the line of the river that I've created. That way it really does look like water is sort of splashing everywhere and doing what water does best. The other thing I remembered is at the bottom of the waterfall there tends to be this huge area of just crashing water and, and it's going everywhere. So I tried to paint that in at the bottom of all these little rivers that I've created. The last thing that I did was, or the last two things I did, I should say, is that I took black paint and I tidied up the edges so it really does look like the water is going straight down in certain parts. And then I also took the black paint and added little patches where you can see through the water. While I was doing that, I was envisioning this one waterfall that I usually visit in the summer and how behind it is sort of this walkable area, so I wanted to create the illusion that there's still something behind the falls and it's not just pure water. The last thing I always do when it comes to any art project is just to keep playing with it until I'm happy with the final result. It doesn't have to be perfect because it'll never be perfect, but as long as it's something that I'm proud of and I really want to like grab it and run to my mom and be like, look what I made, then I'll consider it good enough. Okay, for real now, the last thing I'll do is add a little M in the corner. That's how I sign my work. Thank you so much for watching. I'm Mitty, and I wish you the happiest of creating.